and happy Samhain, my beautiful, scrumptious children. What's that? It's not Halloween anymore? That's weird. Did I ask? In the wise words of our Lord and Savior Alice Cooper, I'm keeping Halloween alive, baby 365, I keep it going. And I know that you know why I've gathered you here today. Today I'm welcoming a brawl in my comment section, but not without good reason. Today I'm comparing 1998's Halloween H20 to the infamous and recently released Halloween Ends. But before I get into any of that, if you also like keeping Halloween alive for the entire year, then go ahead and click subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss another video from me. And now that you've joined my cult, here is the structure for today's video. First, I'll go over background info, box office numbers, critical reception, and the like. Then we'll be comparing the plots of either movie. There will be a lot to get into in the plot section of this video because I think it is probably the most contentious part of Halloween Ends. I'll then go over the characters, which Laurie do I prefer, which version of Michael do I think is more ferocious. After that, we'll talk style, so lighting, writing, everything in between. And finally, we'll compare and contrast the themes of either film. What were we meant to learn? And at the very end, I will stack everything up and we'll try to decide which is the superior film. So we'll start with a little history lesson on Halloween H20. You're probably aware the Halloween franchise has many different timelines, and H20 is a sequel to Halloween 2 from 1981 and may or may not be tied to everything in between. I personally reference this timeline as the sibling timeline because Halloween 2 is where it's infamously revealed that Michael and Laurie are long-lost siblings. But the H20 that we know was originally conceived as something very different, so its road to inception is super interesting. The script went through many different variations. The earliest that I could find was written by Daniel Farrens during the production of The Curse of Michael Myers. Believe it or not, in the very early stages of pre-production, it was going to be called Michael Myers Lord of the Dead. This is from an interview back in 1997 where Daniel Farrens talks about how he wrote something crazy like 10 drafts of the script. He was also credited as the sole writer of Halloween 6, so it kind of makes sense why he was tasked with what was originally going to be called Halloween 7. But basically the treatments that he wrote were all going to pick up right where Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers left off. We were going to pick up with Tommy Doyle as he discovered that the entire town of Haddonfield had some weird plan to try to control Michael. It was loosely inspired by things like The Wicker Man and Rosemary's Baby. However, the writer later decided not to continue his work on the series because he didn't want to see another one of his scripts butchered. I don't know any more about the behind the scenes there, but I feel like it's a little bit unfair because they did most of the reshoots largely due to the fact that Donald Pleasence passed away during the filming of part 6. Regardless, he was out of there, and then another writer came in, Robert Zappi, who pitched the movie Halloween 7, The Two Faces of Evil. But this obviously didn't go over very well either.
Ultimately, what we ended up with at the end of 6 was just so many loose ends. I don't think anyone had the appetite necessarily to resolve them.
Just to insert my 2 cents, I think it was really smart to more or less abandon the Thorne timeline. It's really unclear whether or not it's considered canon in H20, even though when Kevin Williamson was ultimately tasked with writing the script, he was told to include the canon of 4 through 6. So all he did was write in that Laurie had faked her death, and this kind of satisfies the continuity between this and at least Halloween 4. But a lot of times when you see diagrams of the timelines, they don't really acknowledge that Halloween H20 and Resurrection have a connection to the Thorne trilogy. So I guess it's up to the viewer, and when I watch it, I don't acknowledge the connection because then that would mean that Laurie had abandoned her daughter Jamie, which is just super out of character. To me, the sibling trilogy is Halloween, Halloween 2, and H20. The Thorne trilogy and Resurrection are completely branches of their own things in my mind. And speaking of Resurrection, in that movie, they infamously kill off Laurie Strode in the first 15 minutes. But believe it or not, those 15 minutes were basically the deciding factor on why Jamie Lee Curtis did Halloween H20, but we'll come right back to that. How did she get involved in the first place?
Literally, somebody mentioned the date, and I thought, wow, it's going to be 20 years that I've been in show business because Halloween was my first movie. And I thought, I'm still in the movie business. I can still get a job. Wouldn't it be interesting if we went back and made a 20th anniversary movie? See what happened to Laurie Strode. That's how it began.
Her story feels slightly different to Malika Cod and the writers because, according to her, it almost seems like it was her idea. Though she did bring in John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, who would later go on to drop the project, but Jamie Lee Curtis has now said that she wishes she took on that executive producer role because she basically was producing H20. Now, why did John Carpenter drop the project? Well, he had a pretty hefty starting director's fee of $10 million, and he wanted a 3-film film deal with Dimension Films. Unfortunately, they couldn't come to an agreement on that, but it might have been in the film's best interest anyway.
I wrote Halloween 2 and frankly discovered very quickly that there was no more story to this idea. I believe it was like 2 in the morning with a 6-pack of beer in front of a typewriter. And what can I do? Oh, God help me, I'll make him a brother.
From the very first movie, he felt like there was no more story to be told. I think in terms of Michael, at least, he was definitely right, because anytime they've tried to expand on that character, it's been an absolute flop. So if this was a John Carpenter film, would there have been as much care put in? Would it have been even better? The world will never know. Some people are not fans of John Carpenter by this point because they feel like he's spat on the franchise ever since he dropped his involvement. I feel like some people need to understand that he doesn't owe his involvement. He never wanted to make another movie beyond his original one. I feel like people expect him to have this great reverence for the franchise and to be a really big fan of it and be super involved, but like, I don't know why you think he owes you that. Anyway, I'm sure you're dying for me to get back to the fact that Jamie only stayed on this film because she would die in Resurrection. I stumbled upon a really insightful interview of hers where she was on a panel, and it gave me a lot of info that I was blissfully unaware of. There was a draft of the H20 script initially where in the ending, the van goes off a cliff and Laurie survives by hanging onto a helicopter, I guess, and Michael went down with the van. And she was like, no, absolutely not. That's too ambiguous. I want to chop his head off. However,
we have these meetings, we have these talks, and then some ambiguous ending is written in. So I go to the office really pissed. I walk in, and I'm like, what the fuck is happening here? I don't understand this. And we had a stake through the heart, we had a head chopped off, we had it all. And they looked at me and said, Jamie, there's a clause in the contract with Mustafa Akkad that says you can't kill him. What? Now you fucking tell me? This is now a movie where they've hired actors, they've hired a crew. So now for me to go, I'm done, I'm out, I'm gone. There's no way I am doing this again. And they said, how can we do this?
so because of Malik Akkad, it has actually always been canon that Laurie did not chop Michael's head off. That was so upsetting for me personally to learn because I thought that it had always been canon that she did kill Michael until they decided to make another sequel and call it Resurrection. But even since pre-production, it was never Michael under that mask. That's so dirty. Kevin Williamson had to reluctantly come up with the ending that Michael and the security guards swapped places so that Akkad and Jamie Lee Curtis could come to an agreement. And if that was going to be the case, then she wanted her character to end up in an institution over the guilt and she wanted to be killed off. That was her other term of that agreement.
And so that's why, sadly, I'm in Resurrection.
That's why I consider Resurrection to be its own thing, because it was just so foul how all of that panned out. It leaves a stain on what would otherwise be Laurie and Michael's best resolution, in my opinion. But we'll talk more about the ending of the movie later. So great, now we got Laurie back, but the rest of the cast is stacked as well. This movie also stars Jamie Lee Curtis's mom, Janet Leigh, famously from Psycho. She has a few scenes, but the most iconic one obviously being when she drives away in the same car from Psycho. We also get to see a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Josh Hartnett, Jodie Lynn O'Keefe, Michelle Williams. One of the biggest stars of the film at the time was LL Cool J, who was actually a horror and Halloween fan himself.
We're paying the bills, aren't we? Oh, fuck me, shit! Not you, honey. Hold on for a sec. You scared the shit out of me. Sorry, Ronnie.
I thought it was quality work. It wasn't just a cheesy horror movie with a lot of people getting their throats cut. It was really actually a cool script with some smart writing, and I wanted to be a part of it. You know, plus I've always been a fan of the Halloween movies. You know, I was very young when the first Halloween came out. You know, that was 20 years ago, so I was a real little kid, but I remember it. And I did see it. Stuck with me. I remember Jamie Lee screaming in the closet and the whole bit.
And funnily enough, a lot of the younger actors on set were super starstruck by him being there, but he didn't even go by LL Cool J on set. He went by Todd. Also not super relevant, but another one of the funniest things that I learned about the supporting cast is that Josh Hartnett was constantly at odds with the makeup team. They would always be fixing his hair, but he would carry this stupid hat around with him and he would mess up his hair.
It really bothered me when I saw teen films that everybody looked perfectly coiffed in. I just was not far removed from my high school days at this point. And I remember everybody looking like shit most of the time. And I hated that they were trying to make this character look a certain way, cookie cutter and out of the box. And I cut my own hair a little bit. It was a battle that I waged with the hair and makeup department.
I get it, like I totally get what he was going for, but his hair does look really bad in this movie. The director of this movie also ended up being Steve Miner, who directed a few little films called Friday the 13th Parts 2 and 3. So the star power behind this movie was undeniable, and it still only cost about $17 million to produce. The worldwide box office was about $75 million, so it was a worthwhile investment. The critical response has never been great, but I did find a couple of reviews from 1998 when the film came out. Roger Ebert, very famous film critic, gave the film 2 stars, and his review is just a list of complaints about plot holes like, oh, I didn't realize Michael Myers was an electrician, and that the film takes place in a school but there isn't a shower scene. I'm sorry, was the complaint that we didn't see any minors showering? Roger, if you were alive, I would have a lot of follow-up questions to that. Not all the reviews at the time were negative, though. Bob Graham of the San Francisco Chronicle wrote about the movie being fully satisfying and saying praises about Jamie Lee Curtis especially. I start to look at it sideways when he says it might be better than John Carpenter's original Halloween, but he says it's because it's a good exploration of Laurie's trauma, so I guess I'll give it to him. It's really hard for me to gauge how fans felt about the movie at the time of its release, but the worldwide box office doesn't lie. And also basing it off of my engagement on this channel over the years, this does seem to be kind of a fan favorite. The current attitude on the movie seems pretty positive, but it's definitely mixed. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has 63 critic ratings and sits at 52%. It's also been reviewed by over 100,000 audience members and has a rating of 49%, which is odd to me, because generally the audience score is a lot more favorable than the critic score. Similarly, on Letterboxd, it's been reviewed about 94,000 times, but sits at a 2.9. My speculation on the score of it is that I feel like most fans recognize that it might not be the best Halloween movie, but there's certainly a lot about it to enjoy. That's how I feel about it, so I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. I think that my opinion falls in with the vast majority. That about wraps things up on the background of H20, so now here we are 24 years later with another conclusion to a trilogy in this franchise. Halloween Ends has been a very hot topic this past Halloween season, throwing everybody into a tizzy, so let's get into it. As you're probably aware, Halloween Ends is the conclusion to a trilogy that began in 2018, which is a direct sequel to the original film. It retcons everything else, so it is technically the 4th installment of this timeline. Now, I already gave this movie a very thorough review where I featured the most relevant interviews, so I'll be leaving most of that out, and I'll be talking generally more so about the timeline of the production of this new trilogy. This trilogy, of course, was directed by David Gordon Green, and he co-wrote the first film with Danny McBride. Before the movie was even released, in June of 2018, Danny McBride confirmed that they originally wanted to pitch 2 films they would shoot back to back. But Jason Blum agreed that they should just make the one movie and see how the reception of it was before greenlighting a sequel. So the plan has been changing basically from the get-go. The development of this trilogy was super messy. In this article from a little over a year ago, David Gordon Green explains how they expanded it into a trilogy when they realized they had more material than they thought. The original plot was going to be Halloween 2018, and then whatever the original plan for Halloween Ends was. And my theory on that is that it was Halloween Kills plus the last 15 minutes of Halloween Ends. At one point in this interview too, he said that Michael is at the heart of the movie, and that's one of the obstacles and opportunities as a writer. But we refuse to delve into a psychology. We refuse to know more.
Actually, no, that's not the truth, Ellen.
We'll get into that with the plot. It was also originally planned for Kills and Ends to be filmed back to back, but then COVID heavily delayed the production of Ends, and then this also delayed the theatrical release of Kills. Leading up to the release of Halloween Ends, things weren't looking so good, and I don't know why I brushed off all these red flags at the time. I found an interview from June of this year with Jason Blum, who, tangent, he teases that he had lunch with Christopher Landon and that there might be a new Happy Death Day movie in the works soon, which I will continue to shamelessly beg for. But the more important bit from this interview is that Jason Blum said with certainty Halloween Ends was the last Halloween movie Blumhouse would produce. And he said this after a company screening of the movie. Hi, I didn't really explain why I thought this was significant, because I feel like if Halloween Ends performed really, really well and also had a really good audience, critical reception, all that stuff, I don't really see what would have been stopping Malik Akkad from signing a new deal with Blumhouse. You know what I mean? So I just found it interesting that just a couple weeks, I think, after the company screening of Halloween Ends, Jason Blum was like, yeah, that's our last Halloween movie. The very next month, John Carpenter teased that this movie was going to be a huge departure for the franchise. Then at the end of August this year, David Gordon Green confirmed that they were still tweaking the edit despite the movie being in picture lock. He literally said in the interview it changes every day because there's all this pressure to get it right. Red flags. Bright, cherry red flags. We could have all seen it coming from over over a year ago when Jamie Lee Curtis herself said that Halloween Ends would piss off fans. In that very interview as well, she references Halloween H20 as really just a money gig and she did it for the paycheck. So that's all very encouraging, isn't it?
So I am D-E-A-F-N-D. There is N-O-C-H-A-N-C-E that I will ever be in another Halloween movie unless Malik Akkad comes up with a frickin' big-ass payday for Jamie, where I might ultimately turn it over to a charity. But I'm talking about like a big-ass payday.
At least she said she wanted to give it to charity. And she does have a charity called My Hand in Yours, where the proceeds go towards the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, so. Anyways, obviously the production timeline leading up to Halloween Ends was a huge mess. And looking back retrospectively, it seems like it was kind of doomed from the start. The plan for just having a sequel or it being a trilogy kind of was constantly changing. The edit was being changed up until a month before the film's release. And horror hater Jamie Lee Curtis was probably in it for the money all along. Allegedly. What are you gonna do? I think that I personally will just adopt John Carpenter's ideology on the further releases of new Halloween films. He has a hilarious new interview for Variety. I'll link it down below because it's a great laugh. He asked, do you have to be protective of this kind of legacy? Do you take it personally when one comes out and people don't like it? And he was like, no, I don't care. I don't really care. Also love that right after that, the interviewer said, delightful. And here he's going on to kind of reiterate that he wishes that the reception of Halloween 3 had gone differently because he probably would have stuck with the franchise if that had been the case. And he's asked, but do you regret not being more hands-on with the series? And he's like, hell no, they have to pay me every time they make one. Also completely unrelated, but the interviewer asked him if he's seen anything lately that he liked. And he said, not in a bit. I like Jordan Poole. I think he's really good. John Carpenter is such a treasure. I would really like to smoke a joint with that man. Dream blunt rotation would be me, John Carpenter, Art the Clown. Anyway, we've already talked about the reception of Halloween Ends, but it's been a couple weeks since my review, so I'll give you a little update. It's since broken the $100 million mark in the box office, but the drop-off from the first weekend to the second was astronomical. From its first Friday to its second Friday, there was an 89% drop-off. But the critical and audience reception hasn't really changed. It's at a 2.3 on Letterboxd, and it's at a 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. We also spoke recently on one of my live streams about how David Gordon Green reacted to the negative criticism, and he said that he never intended to make a Laurie vs. Michael movie, when that's kind of a bold-faced lie. We also had another one of the Halloween Ends writers come forward, and he said that they never intended on having all three movies take place on the same night, when in reality it's like there never really was much of a plan to begin with, right? Hi, it's me again. I realized that I never even mentioned in the video too that in the extended cut of Halloween Kills that you can watch on the Blu-ray, the ending of it literally shows Laurie on the phone with Michael, and then she hangs up, she picks up a knife, she's in the hospital, and then she leaves, like she's ready to go take him on. So clearly it may have initially been in the plans for all three movies to take place on the same night. It's gotten messy, but that's just the basic gist of everything that's gone down. And honestly, I'm really tired of feeling bamboozled by this production team. I feel like I've been yo-yoed between videos of Jamie Lee Curtis crying over the end of this character, and then videos of her saying she hates horror and only did it for the money. It's a lot. And then also being yo-yoed with the fact that all the marketing led to this being the final showdown between Michael and Laurie, and then David Gordon Green saying he never intended to make a Laurie vs. Michael movie. These two are the definition of gatekeep, gaslight, girl boss. Anyway, I think we deserve to chat about something else now, so let's talk about the plots of either film. In Halloween H20, we pick up with Laurie Strode 20 years after the events of Halloween night in 1978. She now goes by the name Carrie and is a headmaster at her son's private school. Michael is able to track her down and a massacre ensues. He and Laurie go head to head in a final brawl, and when he's presumed dead, she drives off with his body, and after he's revived one last time, she takes his head off with an axe. In Halloween Ends, Corey Cunningham accidentally kills the child he's babysitting the year after Michael's rampage through Haddonfield. 3 years later, plagued by his past, he starts to descend down a dark path while also developing a relationship with Allison, Laurie's granddaughter. In cahoots with Michael, he tries to come between Allison and Laurie to no avail. He's ultimately killed by Michael, who then has a final showdown with Laurie, and she emerges victorious. They're obviously very different movies movies plot-wise, but I kind of wanted to explore how each movie ends their respective trilogy. Halloween H20 more or less shows me that Halloween 2018 probably should have been a standalone film. You can also separate the acts of Halloween H20 to the respective movies of the new trilogy. Act 1 of H20, you have Laurie struggling with her trauma, which is the same as 2018. Michael goes on a rampage like the killing machine that he is in the middle act of H20 and in Halloween Kills. And finally, Laurie has one last showdown with him in the end of Halloween H20 and in Halloween Ends. They even seem to sort of borrow the idea from Halloween 4, where Jamie seemed to be possessed or influenced by Michael to kill people for Halloween Ends. It's almost like the new trilogy is this weird amalgamation of homages to the rest of the franchise.
Boo! It's me again. Hi, sorry. Another thing that I thought worth mentioning here is that I never noticed that the bathroom scene from Halloween 2018 is a really direct homage to the bathroom scene from Halloween H20. I just completely forgot that this scene in H20 existed. And I'm sure there's probably even more homages that even I missed.
By keeping all of that more contained into one film, yes, it's a more basic slasher, you don't spend as much time exploring Laurie's trauma, but it's sufficient. It gets the job done. I think the focus on Laurie makes a lot of sense in H20 because they're siblings, and I wonder if because that dynamic was kind of thrown out, that's why Laurie gets sort of tossed to the side in Halloween Ends. David Gordon Green also said specifically that they wanted to make a love story with Halloween Ends, and that it doesn't feel like that's what it is to me either. It feels like The Corey Show, a case study on a nutcase, and he happens to go on a few dates with Allison. Which I can only beat you guys over the head with this so many times, but to not introduce Corey in 2018 and bring him in suddenly is idiotic. They rush the ending of Laurie's arc and then give Corey a 3-movie arc all in one. Obviously, most of the plot of either movie is really different, so we can focus on the beginnings and the endings. In H20, we open with Laurie having moved to Northern California, which makes the most logical sense. Why would she ever stay in Haddonfield? In Ends, she bought a whole house in Haddonfield, so obviously she had some money, probably some insurance money from her house burning down in 2018. She could have taken Allison and left town because, you know, there's a mass murderer still at large. Even if someone is devoutly tied to their little Midwestern hometown, there's no way you'd stay after that. That's lunacy. Or the fact that the National Guard wasn't brought in to take out this guy who was still at large that had been shot, stabbed, burned, and massacred like 20 people at once. It's just not enough sense being made right off the bat. And then all the middle ground is very different, like I said, so let's jump to the endings. In H20, Laurie valiantly takes off Michael's head with an axe after a very scrappy fight. And then in Ends, she drains him of his blood after about a 3-minute long street brawl. It's weird because you'd think that Ends would feel more climactic because rather than having only 20 years, there has now been 44 years to build up to this showdown, and yet. You might detract from H20 by saying, well, that's not Michael, and to that I say, shh. It might also be how his death was shot in Halloween Ends because it's completely static while she's slitting his throat and it just doesn't really feel that cinematic to me. That's not to say that what these 60-somethings did wasn't impressive because it definitely was. Jamie Lee Curtis has shared behind the scenes videos of her getting her head smashed through fake glass and that doesn't look fun. And her scene partner Jude Courtney had nothing but positive things to say as well.
I can tell you that at one point we were both bruised from our shoulders down to the bottom of our calves. It's incredibly physically demanding. She is not only one of the most talented human beings I've ever worked with, she also has such great athletic skill, and she's in such fierce shape for a woman, and both of us being in our 60s, you know, to be in that kind of shape and to throw down that hard, pretty amazing. I mean, you could bounce quarters off her body, you know what I mean?
Kind of a weird comment on his part, but if it's true, then maybe there really is something to that Activia yogurt. Regardless, his death didn't really feel that cinematic to me. You could argue that the ending of Halloween Ends feels a lot more grounded in reality, maybe, but that hardly means anything to me when you just had possessed Corey over here killing people running around like Michael's little assistant. So unlike Halloween 2 and Halloween Kills, the plots here really aren't too comparable. Unless you just want me to keep repeating how Halloween H20 makes way more sense. The simplicity and common sense were really just key there. I just think they backed themselves into a really weird corner having Halloween Ends be a time jump. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Don't overcomplicate something that can be so easy. Anyway, I think that we'll have more fun comparing the characters, so let's start off with Laurie's offspring. In H20, you had her son John, who gets the job done. He sort of represented Laurie's inability to let go of her past trauma. She kept him from going on fun field trips and maybe got a little bit unreasonably angry when he would go off campus for lunch. But by the midpoint of the movie, she was actually starting to release, and she wanted to send him off on his field trip as long as he called her a lot. So he as a character didn't really do too much, but the way that Laurie was able to bounce off of him I really appreciated. And I like him because he's supportive and he had obviously been taking good care of her. And he also challenges her in a way that I don't feel like ever stepped over the line. And he eventually did win his freedom. I really like the relationship that he and Laurie have. In Ends, we have Allison, who I used to adore but has since become an absolute mess. She's grappling with her trauma in kind of a similar way to Laurie from 2018, I guess. She's very angry, she has terrible taste in men, and her relationship with Laurie is very, very strange. Laurie is now the supportive figure while Allison can't let go, and it's kind of a flip on the dynamic of Halloween H20. But Allison is the most frustrating character to watch because she's completely devolved from who she was one movie ago. Thanks in large part to a one Corey Cunningham. I don't even have anyone to compare him to besides maybe Jamie from Halloween 4. He's just this weird little anomaly. We talked about this in one of my live streams, how David Gordon Green said that Corey was sort of the vessel to explore the psychology of Michael Myers, even though he's kind of flip-flopped on that statement. So it was kind of meant to be a nod to Michael's possible beginnings, but it doesn't work because Michael snapped when he was like 5. Corey is a whole grown-ass man who had lived quite a bit of his life in relative normalcy. You can bring up, oh, his mother was abusive. Yeah, okay, most people who get abused don't become murderers. His whole character study is an entire mess, and now even like a month after seeing this movie, I still can't make sense of it. The amount of sense in his motivations is what? It's bubkiss, goose egg, 0. Why not go to the police after finding Michael Myers? Okay, well, Michael transferred some of his evil into Corey, but Corey also then had the capacity to still love Allison after that. So how would he then not have the capacity to still make other good choices? Or maybe his motive with Allison was just control, I don't know. I think his whole exploration could have been interesting if it was not in tandem with Michael. His character makes me so tired, I'm so over it, so let's just talk about Michael. In H20, I have to admit Chris Durand is one of my least favorite Michaels, and after watching the behind the scenes, it's a little bit more clear to me why.
I showed up not really understanding the importance of this character at all, which I think worked tremendously to my benefit because I wasn't nervous. I didn't read into it too hard. I had to kind of discover the character for myself, which was beneficial in the long run. I didn't try to mimic. It wasn't until 2 weeks into shooting that people were coming up to me on the street asking me for an autograph that I kind of went, this is a bigger deal than I realized. This character resonates.
Let's maybe unpack that a little bit. He thinks that not understanding the character or his importance worked to his benefit. I'm gonna go ahead and push back on that a little bit. One of the best and most iconic things about Michael Myers is his movement. And Nick Castle was of course the one to create the energy of that character. Castle has kind of a genetic background in dancing, so it's no wonder why Michael was so ethereal and enigmatic. He gave him the movements of this like ghostly robot. And Chris Durand, I don't want to call him clumsy, but that's kind of the closest word I can find for it. Michael kind of looks like a big old goofy in H20. The mask also doesn't help. It's one of my least favorite masks of the entire franchise. I hate being able to see Michael's eyes, and you can see them so clearly throughout this film. He's also motivated by his blood relation to Laurie in this film, so it's all about finding her. And he has these sort of highly intelligent, trained assassin vibes, because how did he find her? He just has so much awareness in H20, which is something they got rid of in the newest trilogy and kind of turned him into this empty killing vessel yet again. Except for in Halloween Ends. The mask is badass, it stays looking good in this new trilogy, and Jude Courtney is my favorite Michael Myers. But I don't know if I also need to compare Corey as a Michael because he also wore the mask. I think that Corey as Michael has some of the best kills of this movie, and he's the stronger of the two of them, which just sucks because in Halloween Kills, Jude Courtney had the best Michael performance ever done, and then in Ends he just goes out with a whimper.
I know I'm done. At the end of the day, it's like I agreed to do 3 films. So it's kind of like, an athlete retiring in his prime. Look, we just won the Super Bowl, I'm gonna retire.
Sucks. And now, all of the sudden, Michael is not impartial. He's willing to take on an accomplice. It stirs up this whole shitstorm of Michael suddenly having motivations when in 2018 in Halloween Kills, they proved to us that wasn't the case. Laurie finally learned that Michael never had an obsession with her, it was just this delusion created by her PTSD. And then in Ends, all of the sudden, Michael is no longer resigning himself to death, he has no other motives until this sad boy comes along to help him with his chores.
Michael Myers
Myers in that mask represents pure evil. There is no rhyme or reason. Everybody's worst nightmare come to life.
No, Halloween Ends goes directly against that. The fact that Michael changes his behavior and does something that we quite literally have never seen him do in 44 years, it means there is some kind of rhyme or reason to what he does. Laurie herself said in Halloween Kills, the more he kills, the more he transcends. So what the fuck is this? What motive could he possibly have for not killing Corey? I could talk in circles about this for literally hours and not come up with a sufficient reason as to why they did this, and I think that's a hallmark of a bad movie. I love interpretation. I love when people get different experiences and feel different meanings out of films, but this was ambiguous to the point of stupidity. Well done, you've maintained Michael as this very enigmatic creature, but you've also exploded into this entire new realm of what it means to be Michael Myers, only to kill him off and kill Corey off too for good measure. This whole new trilogy is so backwards, I swear to God. So let me stop talking in circles and we can talk briefly about the styles of either film. A lot of people say that H20 feels too much like a Scream movie, which I feel like is a dumb complaint because Scream is a great movie and it was the late 90s, so what did you expect? It was also written by Kevin Williamson, so of course it was gonna have that vibe. I think in terms of production design, the whole opening of the movie when we start at the nurse Marion's house looks phenomenal. The fall time vibes are definitely there, it feels like Halloween. When we go to Northern California, where Laurie now lives, suddenly it's summer again. Northern California experiences a really beautiful fall, so I have no idea why the vibes vanish there. But I think that we also have a lot of fun camera movements too, especially when Laurie first sees Michael's face through the door. They build up pretty good tension. Also, for the most part, I really like all the dialogue of the movie. It feels pretty natural, except for the really forced kind of callback lines.
Well, hey, it's Halloween. I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
As I said earlier, that's probably one of the more iconic scenes of the movie, but this scene also does one of my least favorite things. The one thing that I can't really stand about this movie is every single time that an innocuous character will provide a massive jump scare. It happens like 4 times. I pointed this out in my Halloween Ends review already, but that movie is severely guilty of this as well. I pulled at least 4 clips of terrible jump scares in that review. I think that overall Halloween Ends also had better kills than H20 because in H20 it feels like a good majority of them happen off screen. In Ends we see brutal stabbings, faces getting smashed, a blowtorch to the throat, but it still feels a little bit lackluster in Ends just because of how much we were treated in Halloween Kills. So I don't know if it's really a fair comparison between H20 and Ends. There's also some bizarre dialogue choices in Halloween Ends. Also in my review, I famously quoted Laurie Strode as having one of the best lines delivered in cinematic history, the one where she tells Allison to show Grief her tits. I'll stand by that, but that came way out of left field. I don't know if it's a Danny McBride influence, but there's no subtlety to the humor kind of scattered throughout. It's just all of a sudden, bam, it's there. They also wrote the high schoolers as if they wanted us to transport back to the days of Stephen King's childhood. Stephen King famously writes the most over-the-top bullies that you will ever see. And one of my last notes on the style, the editing I think is pretty obviously atrocious. It's not a surprise to me in the slightest that up until a month before the movie's release they were still tweaking it. That's crazy. Why are you not confident in the mess that you made? Wait, is it because you weren't being entirely truthful?
This is a movie that to me is a love song, a tribute to the fans. It's a love song to Laurie and Michael, and whatever their relationship is something I want to explore.
Actually, no, that's not the truth, Ellen.
I don't like the old bait and switch we had going on with the marketing of this film. I don't like it one bit. He also said in other interviews that he wanted to do the one thing that no one would expect, which was make a love story. So which is it? Because I don't like having my intelligence questioned, and I am sure that a lot of other people would concur on that. And I think that everything surrounding Halloween Ends was just the epitome of whiplash. The best word I can use for the style of this film is just mess. It's a mess. The only thing consistent about it is the really dark and depressing atmosphere. If you've been around on my channel for a while, then you know that in general these comparison videos are very like professional video essays. I'm generally really concise and I'm really good about finding the language to express exactly how I feel, and Halloween Ends, it's like it reprogrammed my brain. Or it's working like a bug or a virus where whenever I try to form a coherent thought about the movie, it just scrambles it. So strap in for this next portion of the the video because I'm gonna try to tackle the themes of either movie. Luckily, I've already kind of covered the basics earlier in this video and in my Halloween Ends review, so I can just kind of briefly recap what we've been over so far. In H2O, we start with Laurie suffering from PTSD. I think it's done really modestly but effectively. She's having nightmares, she's having a couple drinks with her lunch, she's really overbearing of her son. And what we learn from this is that you can't ever really run away from who you are. Eventually, you have to face what's ailing you. A life on the run is not a life, but in broader terms, you can kind of apply this to almost any sort of adult problem you might have. Most adult problems, especially concerning our family, will not be properly addressed until you face them head on. So Michael can be used as a metaphor in this movie because as soon as Laurie opens up to her boyfriend about who she is and she releases her son, Michael shows up for one last showdown. She makes amends with the people in her life, and the last step was to kind of vanquish this trauma once and for all. It's pretty straightforward, so not much to expand on, and obviously in the real world, your trauma will stay with you probably for your entire life, but you finally learn how to handle it. In Halloween Ends, I went in pretty in depth in my review about how the whole theme is about misinformation and how that can plague a society, but they do it in the stupidest of ways, with the entire town turning on Laurie because of this local dumbass DJ. All because of this rumor he started. People think that she teased a mentally ill man and then he snapped. That makes no goddamn sense. Do the people of Haddonfield not know what happened in 1978, that he escaped and is whatever? Even Allison, who lived through the 2018 trauma with Laurie, turns on her. It makes no damn sense. You were there. But that's not even the main theme, I would say. That's just sort of shoved in there. The main theme, I guess, is when we ostracize members of our society and how that can lead to psychosis. That's also kind of tied into the other theme and how that leads to a lack of empathy because no one seemed to recognize how traumatized he was by the situation. So he reaches a breaking point and he turns that energy outwards and he gets revenge on the people who did him wrong. I have no idea why they decided to tie that in with a love story because thematically that is so confusing. The only logical answer for why they tied it in this way is because Allison is Laurie's granddaughter, and that's the only real way that Michael would have ended up at Laurie's house at the end of this movie. That's my main gripe because the story is so flimsy, it's only tied together through plot conveniences. Another kind of odd thematic element of this movie is at the very end where it's about kind of letting killers die in anonymity. They say Michael had no tombstone and the stories will kind of die with the people of Haddonfield, or maybe they'll pass them on orally, which is kind of good and bad. I think it's really applicable to current pop culture. We have shows like Dahmer, which really glorify the situation, and people are showing some really ugly colors right now. We see people on TikTok who think it's quirky and cute to be like, ugh, I didn't think that there was enough gore in the show. I'm just so desensitized. People dressing up as him for Halloween or dressing up their children as Jeffrey. You're sick. You're sick in the head. So I was kind of surprisingly satisfied by that ending of Michael. However, it also felt like a little bit of a weird move considering what led up to that and the fact that he is a fictional killer. It seems like a weird note to end on when historically slasher killers have kind of always killed the abusive jock who's really mean to his girlfriend. Or take Chucky, for example, who considers homophobic people to be monsters. It's a wonderful catharsis because it's not real. So I guess that I wouldn't have treated the ending any other way. I don't know if there's a better way to do it.
I've thought about it since then, and I just wouldn't have included that narration. Just cut to her with Frank on the porch.
But something about it just didn't sit right with my spirit, and I'm pretty sure it's just because of how Michael was treated throughout that movie. And also because it almost felt like they were calling out the fans for letting his name live on. If we didn't keep these fictional killers alive, y'all would not have a job. Anyway, let me stop. The virus is acting up. I'm talking in circles again, which is annoying. This has undoubtedly been one of my worst comparison videos to date, I think because of how much of a mess Halloween Ends was. I'll be coming out with a comparison soon of Halloween 2 to Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, which should be much more concise and coherent, and that's saying something because have you seen Rob Zombie's Halloween 2? So now it's time for the somewhat arbitrary comparison where we tally up the points and we try to decide which is the superior film. In terms of plot, Kiss. Keep it simple, stupid. I'm handing it to H2O. In terms of characters, I have to admit, I do like the more childlike healed version of Laurie from Ends, but I hate the rest of the characters, so I'm gonna give it to H2O again. In terms of style, I don't think that I really have much of a preference. Both movies rely really heavily on jump scares, but Ends does have a more consistent kind of dark aesthetic. In terms of themes, I literally do not know what the hell is going on most of the time in Halloween Ends, so I'm gonna give that to H2O. So if we tally all that up, it looks like H2O is our winner today. Yay! God, what a buzzkill this video ended up being. They're usually a bit more fun, but even weeks later, I'm still reeling from Halloween Ends. friends. So sorry if I projected any negative vibes your way, let's just shake those off. I think the worst thing is that I still spent like a week of my life on this video and researching and scripting it, and it still turned out to be a total mess. But that time given would not have been possible without my patrons. Yes, I truly mean it. I would not be able to make these insane 40-minute long deep dive videos without these people, because they give me the benefit of time, and in return I do post a lot of bonus content over there, so subscribe, the link is down below. If that's not for you, the rest of my social media is also linked down below. If you're a Halloween fan, there's a huge catalog of Halloween content on this channel, so I'm sure there's more for you to enjoy. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you stick around. Until next time, bye!
You know, you need to find someone that can let go, that makes you want to rip off your shirt and show grief your fucking tits and say, you know what? Let's go.